Hello, welcome back to Talk, the home of common sense on the good ship political wisdom. And your captain today for this drive time show is Admiral Alex Phillips. She's going to be joined by an actual Admiral now, former Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, who's a retired US Navy officer and used to work in all things intelligence at the Pentagon as well, and a very dear friend of mine indeed. Mike, it's great to have you back on the programme. Let's have a little talk about what is going on between Israel and Lebanon. You've had France and Germany say, we want a 21-day ceasefire. You've had similar noises coming out of the UK government, and you've got Benjamin Netanyahu instructing his military to keep fighting at full force and has yet to give a response to the proposed ceasefire deal. Is Netanyahu being gung-ho, or does he have every right to try and push Hezbollah back?
Well, thanks for having me, Alex. First off, I think Israel feels abandoned by the West with respect to Hamas, Hezbollah, and the fact that the Iranians are really the orchestrators of these attacks. And they've literally ignored Iran over the last 6 years through an appeasement strategy. So what Netanyahu is doing, first with the amazing attack on the Hezbollah leadership through the pagers and the radios, now following that up with very aggressive military attacks into Lebanon, he's sending the signal that he's willing to go it alone if he needs to. And of course, everybody's driving to this bargaining table around the UN General Assembly by, once again, the U.S. allowing the president of Iran to speak at the General Assembly. So you're watching a lot of chess pieces being moved right now. But I think the takeaway I have is that Israel can and will defend its sovereignty by any means possible.
Where do you see this going? How far is this potentially going to escalate? Because certainly Hezbollah are on the back foot, and we've seen various sort of, claims that there's going to be vengeance from both Iran, from the leader of Hezbollah. We're still waiting on some of that vengeance to take place. It seems to me, actually, that Israel are on the front foot and are dominating right now. But is that a bit of a risky game to play? After all, doesn't Hezbollah have the biggest military outside of an actual state military and have an arsenal that most countries would be very envious of?
Yeah, Hezbollah is a very capable fighting force, both on the ground, in the air with rockets, and they are far superior to anything Hamas has in Gaza. So they are a very legitimate threat to Israel, and they have basically chased a lot of Israelis out of the northern part of their country. But I think if you go back in time, and history will tell you that oftentimes these ceasefires just prolong a larger conflict later. We saw that in the early 80s with the PLO. Reagan finally had to dispatch a battleship to the Eastern Mediterranean to get the ceasefire to really be taken seriously. So I think what Netanyahu understands is that escalation control on the part of the Israelis is the only thing that the Iranians appreciate and understand. If they see weakness, they will just rearm and attack. So in Netanyahu's mind, a ceasefire is nothing more than allowing the proxy networks to reload, rearm, and reacquaint themselves with a bigger attack.
Talking about escalation control, where are we at with Putin? Because once again, he's saber-rattling, talking about changing the rules for the thresholds at which point Russia would be able to use nuclear weapons, whereas before it was sort of in response to it being a nuclear threat. But now just essentially what could be a joint attack, the possibility of using nuclear weapons if it was detected that there'd been the start of a massive launch of missiles, aircraft and drones into its territory, which would deem a critical threat to the country's sovereignty. Do you think that this is in any way connected to the use of Storm Shadow missiles? And could he essentially be trying to send a message to the West saying, look, if your missiles are seen coming down in Russian territory, then we could actually go nuclear?
No, this is exactly the rhetoric that he's tried to create by the inclusion of Storm Shadow or ATACMS or lifting the restrictions on the use of those weapons into the Russian territory, which in fact is the only reason they really need these weapons, is to attack deep into Russian territory, where the Russians are launching massive attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure and its people. So this has been Putin's escalation play all along, by saying a threat from non-nuclear nations, in this case, such as Ukraine, that is backed by a nuclear nation, such as the UK or the US, de facto could be grounds for a tactical nuclear weapon attack back into Ukraine. This is pure rhetoric. It's the same thing he did with Storm Shadow. 3 weeks ago when we provided Storm Shadow to the Ukrainians, his response was, well, the Ukrainians can't fire these weapons without the help of the UK. So de facto, that's a NATO attack on my country. This is his rhetoric. This is the only game he has. And he's doing it for one reason, which is to continue to keep the Americans and the Brits concerned about escalation so that we continue to restrict Ukraine's ability to wage war against Russia.
We know that when it comes to some of these malign characters, Iran, Russia, the anti-Western axis, that they operate warfare on various different levels, one being, you know, wars of attrition, creating threats, but also they like destabilizing countries by distracting them internally. And I want to ask you about this other story that has come out very recently in the UK, at least, which is that Trump has been warned by US intelligence of Iran assassination threats. And Trump, in response, has basically said, if anyone comes and tries to take me out, I want assurances that America would turn around and say, we're now going to, you know, blow Iran to smithereens. I mean, this is an astonishing story. And of course, this comes off the back of there being 2 assassination attempts on the president. What's going on here, Mike?
Well, first and foremost, what you have is cognitive warfare taking place, orchestrated by Russia and China to seed fear in the United States. And Iran is the snake, the head of the snake. And so when Trump rightfully took out Soleimani, you heard great call for a response by Iran. You saw nothing. Iran will back down when they are poked in the eye. And I think they're definitely afraid of President Trump. And so you've had 2 very legitimate assassination attempts on the president, which is a whole other issue that's being addressed by the U.S. Congress right now, because these are massive failures of the Secret Service. My question would be, is this threat legitimate by Iran? And how long did we know about it before we notified the Republican nominee for president and former president of the United States? I'm gravely concerned that we've known about this threat longer than President Trump has known about this threat.
We talk about the assassination of Soleimani, who, of course, was the head of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. And we know that they are essentially the sort of henchmen of the regime, but they operate not just in Iran, but also they get a lot done in other countries. Could it be possible that actually there would be a valid motivation for Iran to attempt to assassinate Donald Trump, knowing that, frankly speaking, he's the one who wants to take the JCPOA back off the table, he wants to put sanctions on Iran, that he would actually be extremely tough against Iran, that surely there's enough motivation there for them to do it, especially if they like using proxies, especially if they could use some sort of proxy in America?
Well, I think if you're exactly right. The IRGC is really an apparatchik of the mullahs of Iran, who are frankly running a revolution. And they have been resourced for the last 4 years by the appeasement of America, giving them hundreds of billions of dollars to fuel these proxy networks, turning a blind eye to allow them to sell oil back into the market. So we've actually resourced the ability for Iran to make these types of threats. You look at the 200 plus attacks on U.S. service members in the Middle East during the Biden administration by Iran, not by their proxy networks, by Iran proper. They are a clear and present danger to America. So this threat on Donald Trump is, in my opinion, much about cognitive warfare and trying to sow doubt in the American people that Trump will actually create more escalation problems, not less, when in fact I think your read is more accurate, which is they do not want Donald Trump to be the president of the United States in 2024.
So what would be, very quickly, Mike, what would be stopping them actually, like I said, using a proxy, using someone who might look like a high school shooter or a rando who's spoken out on the war in Ukraine? What would be the disincentivization for them not to do that and actually try and get rid of Trump?
Well, that's been their playbook. I mean, that's the Al-Qaeda playbook. That's the ISIS playbook. It's what you've seen happen in the UK. They radicalize young, disenchanted people who are disenchanted because of their lot in life at home. And so they are very easy targets for radical groups under the IRGC to radicalize them and get them to believe that it's in their best interest to attempt to kill the president. And I think that is something that is right out of the Iranian playbook. So we must take it very seriously.
It's incredibly scary and fascinating stuff. Thank you for talking to me about it, Mike. Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt there. I mean, absolutely astonishing stuff. 2 assassination attempts on Donald Trump's life, and now US intelligence are saying to Trump that they have a clear and credible threat that Iran does actually want him out of the picture. And Donald Trump saying, well, look, we need all of Congress to get together, get behind me and say, if anybody tried to do this, we would come after the perpetrators with fire and fury. We live in pretty frightening times.